Professor Marcus Wellington was untouchable, 43 years old, tenure at Columbia, and a 7-year streak of seducing his students. Then he met Lily Patterson. She looked innocent. She seemed vulnerable. She was perfect. But Lily was hiding something deadly, a disease that would shrink his manhood, destroy his career, and leave him reeking of rot. This isn't a love story. It's biological warfare. And Professor Wellington never saw it coming. Professor Marcus Wellington stood at the front of Columbia University's prestigious lecture hall, his voice commanding the attention of 200 undergraduate students. At 43, he was handsome in that distinguished academic way, salt and pepper hair, sharp jawline, tailored suits that cost more than most students' monthly rent. His wife Sarah's inheritance funded his wardrobe, though she had no idea it also funded hotel rooms across Manhattan. Faulkner understood something fundamental about the human condition, Marcus said, pacing the stage with practiced ease. That we are all capable of darkness. That respectability is often just a mask we wear. The irony of his words was lost on him. In the front row, Madison Chin scribbled notes frantically, her blonde hair falling across her face. She was one of his. He'd betted her 3 weeks ago after office hours, whispering promises about recommendation letters and graduate school connections. The week before, it had been Ashley Rodriguez. The week before that, Jennifer Walsh. Marcus had been doing this for 7 years, ever since he'd gotten tenure. The university was his hunting ground, and young women seeking mentorship were his prey. He had a system: identify the vulnerable ones, scholarship students desperate for advantages, ambitious girls willing to trade dignity for opportunities, lonely freshmen far from home. He'd perfected the approach: extra attention in class, private meetings to discuss their work, wine in his office after hours, then the move to a hotel because he'd never soil his marital bed. Sarah Wellington sat at home in their Upper West Side brownstone, oblivious. She was 41, elegant, a former lawyer who'd retired after their daughter Emma was born. Emma was now 15, away at boarding school in Connecticut, which gave Marcus even more freedom. Sarah trusted him completely, trusted that her successful, respected husband was working late, attending conferences, mentoring students. She had no idea that mentoring was code for something far more sinister. After class, Marcus gathered his notes as students filed out. Madison lingered, as he knew she would. Professor Wellington? Her voice was soft, uncertain. I was wondering if you had time to discuss my paper. I'm struggling with the thesis. Marcus glanced at his watch, a Rolex Sarah had given him for their 20th anniversary. I have office hours at 3. Can you make it? Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Madison's grateful smile made him feel powerful. They always looked at him like he was doing them a favor. But someone else was watching too. From the back of the lecture hall, a petite brunette with wide brown eyes and an innocent face observed the exchange. Lily Patterson looked like she belonged in a church choir, not a revenge plot. She wore modest dresses, spoke softly, smiled sweetly. No one would ever suspect what burned beneath that carefully constructed facade. Lily had enrolled at Columbia 3 months ago, transferring from a small college upstate. Her transcripts were impeccable, her references glowing, her essays compelling. What the admissions office didn't know was that every word of her application had been calculated toward one goal: getting close to the men who destroyed her. 6 months earlier, Lily had been different, trusting, optimistic, in love with a Columbia senior named Derek Matthews. They'd met when she'd visited campus for a weekend, and the whirlwind romance had seemed like destiny. Derek was charming, attentive, perfect. Until the burning started. Until the diagnosis came back. Until Derek admitted he'd been sleeping with half the campus and had given her something that would never go away. The infection was rare, aggressive, and devastating. It lay dormant at first, then attacked with vicious efficiency. The doctors had explained the progression with clinical detachment, chronic pain, permanent damage, potential infertility. But the worst part was knowing Derek had given it to her deliberately. He'd known he was infected and hadn't cared enough to use protection or even warn her. When she'd confronted him, Derek had laughed. "Shit happens, babe. Get over it." She hadn't gotten over it. Instead, she'd meticulously researched the disease, its transmission, its timeline. And she'd made a decision: if she had to live with this forever, she wouldn't suffer alone. The men who used women like tissues, who took and discarded and destroyed, they deserved to understand consequences. Derek had been first. She'd seduced him one last time, ensuring transmission, then disappeared before symptoms showed. By the time he figured it out, she was gone, and he had no way to find her. She'd watched from afar as he infected others, a walking biological weapon she'd unleashed. But Derek wasn't enough. Her rage was bigger than one careless boy. She'd heard the stories about Columbia, the professors who preyed on students, the boys who bragged about their conquests, the campus culture that protected predators. So she'd applied, gotten in, and begun her research. Professor Marcus Wellington's reputation had reached her within days. The Whisper network of female students was extensive, warnings passed along about which professors to avoid alone, which office hours to attend in groups, which men couldn't be trusted. Marcus's name came up constantly, though no one had officially reported him. The power dynamic was too steep, the risk too high, the chance of being believed too low. Lily had studied him for weeks. She'd learned his patterns, his preferences, his system. She'd positioned herself perfectly, transferred into his American literature class, performed well enough to be noticed but not so well as to seem threatening, cultivated the exact image of vulnerability he found irresistible. Now, as she watched Madison linger hopefully, Lily felt no sympathy. Madison wasn't blameless. She knew what she was doing, trading sex for advantages. But Marcus was the real target. He was the professor, the authority figure, the married man who should know better. Lily gathered her things and left the lecture hall, already planning her next move. She'd attend his office hours next week, ask innocent questions about Hemingway, let him think he was the one pursuing her. Men like Marcus never suspected the prey might be hunting them. That evening, Marcus arrived home to find Sarah preparing dinner. Their brownstone was beautiful, 4 floors of tasteful furniture and art, the kind of home featured in architecture magazines. Sarah had inherited it from her parents, along with the trust fund that had made Marcus's academic career possible. Without her money, he'd still be an adjunct scrambling for classes. "How was your day?" Sarah asked, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. She'd been a successful attorney before Emma, and sometimes Marcus saw flashes of that sharp intelligence that had first attracted him. Mostly, though, he saw her as comfortable wallpaper, pretty, appropriate, and utterly predictable. The usual. Lectures, meetings, grading. Marcus poured himself scotch from the bar cart. "I have office hours tomorrow afternoon, so I'll be home late." "Again?" Sarah's knife paused mid-chop. "Marcus, you've been home late every day this week." "It's the nature of the job, Sarah. Students need guidance. That's what I'm here for." The words came easily, he'd said them hundreds of times. Sarah wanted to push back, to question, to demand attention. But she swallowed her concerns like she'd been swallowing them for years. Emma called. "She wants to come home this weekend." "Can't. I have a conference in Boston." Another lie. He had a hotel room booked, and Madison had already agreed to meet him there under the pretense of a research trip. After dinner, Marcus retreated to his study to prepare for tomorrow's conquest. He reviewed Madison's file: good student, scholarship recipient, first-generation college. Perfect. She'd be grateful, compliant, willing to do whatever it took to secure his recommendation. What Marcus didn't know was that across town, in a modest apartment in Washington Heights, Lily Patterson was also preparing. She laid out her outfit for tomorrow, a conservative dress that suggested innocence, modest heels, minimal makeup. She reviewed her strategy, rehearsed her lines, steeled herself for what needed to happen. The infection inside her was like a ticking clock. She'd already passed it to 3 men since Derek, all of them users, players, predators in their own right. But Marcus would be her masterpiece. A respected professor, a married man, someone with everything to lose. His fall would be spectacular. Lily stood at her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. The innocent girl who'd fallen in love with Derek Matthews was gone, destroyed by his carelessness and cruelty. In her place was something harder, colder, focused. Some people might call her a monster. She preferred to think of herself as justice. "Tomorrow," she whispered to her reflection. "Tomorrow, Professor Wellington meets his match." Neither of them could sleep that night, Marcus anticipating another easy conquest, Lily steeling herself for revenge. The city stretched out around them, 8 million people living their lives, unaware that in one prestigious university, a predator and his hunter were circling each other. The reckoning was coming. Marcus Wellington had spent 7 years thinking he was untouchable, protected by tenure and reputation and the university's reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse, brought down by a petite brunette who looked like she wouldn't hurt a fly. Lily fell asleep with a smile on her face. Phase 2 was about to begin. Marcus's office was exactly what one would expect from a tenured literature professor: floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs, a mahogany desk that had probably cost more than most people's cars. Framed degrees from Yale and Harvard hung on the walls, along with photos of Marcus shaking hands with famous authors at literary conferences. The window overlooked the Columbia campus, giving him a perfect view of his hunting grounds. At 3:15 p.m. on Wednesday, there was a soft knock at his door. "Come in," Marcus called, expecting Madison. Instead, Lily Patterson entered, carrying a worn copy of The Sun Also Rises, and looking apologetic. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Professor Wellington. I know I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping you might have a few minutes. I'm really struggling with the Hemingway assignment. Marcus masked his irritation with a practiced smile. He'd been looking forward to Madison, but this girl was intriguing too. He'd noticed her in class, always in the back, always quiet, always taking notes. She had that wholesome, untouched quality that some men found boring but others found irresistible. Of course, Miss Patterson. Lily Patterson. I transferred in this semester. She sat in the chair across from his desk, crossing her ankles primly. Everything about her body language screamed innocence, the modest dress, the nervous hand-wringing, the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. Perfect, Marcus thought. These were always the most interesting, the good girls who'd never been bad before. What's troubling you about Hemingway? Marcus leaned back in his chair, assuming his mentor pose. His prose seems simple on the surface, but there's tremendous depth if you know where to look. That's just it, Lily said, leaning forward earnestly. I feel like I'm missing something. Like there's this whole layer of meaning I can't access. She bit her lip, a gesture of frustration that Marcus found deeply attractive. My previous school was much smaller. I'm worried I'm not prepared for Columbia standards. I'm sure you're more capable than you think. Marcus stood and moved around the desk, perching on its edge closer to her. It was his standard move, closing the physical distance, establishing intimacy. Where did you transfer from? A small college upstate. You wouldn't have heard of it. Lily looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, and Marcus felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. Professor Wellington, can I be honest with you? Please. Call me Marcus when we're alone. Another standard move. And yes, honesty is always best. I'm terrified of failing. This class, this school, it's everything to me. I worked so hard to get here, and I can't mess it up. Her voice cracked slightly, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes. I don't have anyone here. No friends, no support system. Sometimes I feel completely lost. The vulnerability was intoxicating. Marcus reached out and patted her shoulder in what might look like a fatherly gesture but lingered just a second too long. You're not alone, Lily. That's what I'm here for. To help students like you reach their potential. Really? She looked at him with such gratitude, such hope. You'd help me? Of course. In fact, Marcus checked his watch. I have time now if you'd like to discuss your paper in more depth. Perhaps over coffee? There's a cafe off campus where we could talk more freely. It was happening exactly as Lily had planned. She'd researched his patterns exhaustively, talked to former students, pieced together his methodology. The concerned mentor act, the offer to meet off campus, the gradual boundary erosion. He was completely predictable. I wouldn't want to impose, Lily said, but her eyes said yes. Nonsense. Mentoring gifted students is the best part of my job. Marcus grabbed his coat. There's this place in the village, very quiet, perfect for serious academic discussion. 20 minutes later, they sat in a dim cafe in Greenwich Village, far from campus where no one would recognize them. Marcus had ordered wine despite it being barely 4 o'clock. Lily sipped hers slowly, playing the role of the inexperienced drinker unsure of her limits. "Tell me about yourself, Lily," Marcus said, his knee brushing hers under the small table. "What brings someone like you to Columbia?" "Someone like me?" She tilted her head innocently. "Smart, beautiful, clearly from a more sheltered background." Marcus's hand moved to her wrist, ostensibly emphasizing his point but really testing her boundaries. "The city must seem overwhelming." "It is," Lily admitted, letting a slight tremor enter her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake leaving home. Everyone here seems so sophisticated, so experienced. I feel like such a child." "You're not a child, Lily." Marcus's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "You're a woman with enormous potential. You just need someone to help you unlock it." The double meaning hung between them. Lily looked down at her wine glass, the picture of nervous innocence. Inside, she was counting, 3 more moves, maybe 4, and he'd suggest going somewhere more private. His hotel, probably. He never brought students to his home. "Professor Wellington, Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" Lily met his eyes, her own wide and vulnerable. "Anything. Are you happy? You seem like you have everything, the career, the respect, the beautiful family I've heard about. But sometimes in class, you seem, I don't know, like you're searching for something." It was a calculated risk, this pseudo-psychological insight. Men like Marcus loved thinking they were complex, misunderstood. That their infidelity was about existential yearning rather than simple entitlement. Marcus was quiet for a moment, genuinely caught off guard. No student had ever asked him this. They usually just giggled and flirted and made it easy. "That's very perceptive," he said finally. "The truth is, Lily, success isn't the same as fulfillment. My wife is a wonderful woman, but we married young. We've grown in different directions. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role rather than living a life." "That sounds lonely," Lily said softly, placing her hand over his. "Everyone should have someone who truly sees them." "Do you see me, Lily?" Marcus's thumb stroked her palm. "I think so. I see someone brilliant and passionate who's trapped in expectations. Someone who deserves to feel alive." She paused, then took the calculated leap. "I should go. This is probably inappropriate, and I don't want to cause you problems." "Wait." Marcus tightened his grip on her hand. This was the crucial moment. If she left now, the spell would break. "It's not inappropriate. We're just 2 people having a conversation. 2 people who understand each other." "Are we?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "I think we could be." Marcus signaled for the check. "Lily, I have a place nearby. A small apartment I use for research and grading. We could continue our conversation there, more privately. Would you be comfortable with that?" There it was. Lily let herself look hesitant, conflicted, then slowly nodded. "I trust you, Marcus." "Good girl," he said, and the condescension in those words made Lily's blood boil beneath her innocent mask. They took a cab to a discreet building in Midtown. Marcus had a studio apartment on the 8th floor, his fuck pad, though he'd never used that crude term. It was furnished minimally, a bed, king-sized, of course, a desk for appearances, a bathroom. This was where he brought them all, away from his marriage, away from his real life. "Can I get you more wine?" Marcus asked as they entered. "Maybe water?" Lily's voice was small. "I'm already feeling a little dizzy." "Of course. The couch is comfortable." Marcus disappeared into the tiny kitchenette, giving Lily a moment alone. She used it to steady herself. This was the moment. Everything depended on the next hour. She'd timed it carefully. She was at peak infectiousness, the window where transmission was most certain. The disease was already ravaging her body in ways the doctors said would be permanent, but she'd stopped taking the medications that reduced transmission. She wanted maximum potency for this. Marcus returned with water and fresh wine for himself. He sat close to her on the couch, close enough that their bodies touched from shoulder to knee. "You're trembling," he said, rubbing her arm. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Lily admitted. "I've never. I'm not very experienced with." She let the sentence trail off, painting herself as the virgin sacrifice. "There's nothing to be nervous about." Marcus's hand moved to her face, tilting it toward his. "I'll take care of you. I'll show you things you've never imagined." When he kissed her, Lily forced herself not to recoil. His lips were skilled, experienced, completely confident. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, one cupping her face, the other sliding up her thigh beneath her modest dress. Lily kissed him back, playing the role of the innocent girl overwhelmed by an older man's attention. She let him think he was seducing her, let him believe in his own power and charm. He had no idea he was the one being hunted. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus whispered against her neck, giving her one chance to back out. It was the move of a man who wanted to believe he wasn't completely predatory, give her a choice, even though the entire situation was designed to make saying no nearly impossible. "I'm sure," Lily breathed. "I want this. I want you." What followed was mechanical for Lily, performed with detachment despite her body's participation. She'd learned to separate her mind from what was happening, a skill developed after Derek, refined with each subsequent target. Marcus was careful enough not to hurt her but selfish enough to prioritize his own pleasure. He whispered things he probably thought were romantic but were just possessive. He took his time, proud of his stamina, completely unaware that every moment of contact was sealing his fate. Afterward, as Marcus dozed with satisfied smugness, Lily lay awake calculating timelines. The incubation period averaged 2 weeks. Another week for symptoms to become noticeable. She had about a month before his world started crumbling. "That was incredible," Marcus murmured, pulling her closer. "You're incredible. We should do this again. Regularly." "I'd like that," Lily said softly. And she meant it, not for the sex, but for the confirmation that he was exactly the predator she'd believed him to be. One time might be a mistake, a moment of weakness. But regularly? That was a pattern. That was predation. That was deserving of what was coming. They dressed slowly. Marcus gave her his private number, only for special students, he said with a wink. He made her promise not to tell anyone, framing it as protecting both their reputations rather than the cover-up it truly was. "Our secret," Lily agreed, and kissed him goodbye. On the cab ride back to campus, Lily felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. She was a weapon now, and weapons didn't feel. They simply executed their purpose. She thought about Marcus going home to his wife, kissing her hello, asking about her day, all while carrying Lily's scent and secret. She thought about him lying in his marital bed, perhaps even having sex with Sarah, spreading the infection even further. Good. Sarah might be an innocent in all this, but she'd enabled Marcus by never questioning, never pushing, never demanding better. Back in her apartment, Lily showered for 40 minutes, scrubbing until her skin was raw. No amount of water could make her feel clean, but the ritual helped maintain her sanity. She'd done this now 4 times, Derek, then 3 others, now Marcus. Each time she told herself it was the last. Each time she knew it wasn't. Because the anger never faded. The sense of violation, of being used and discarded like trash, of being infected with something permanent by someone who didn't care enough to even try to protect her, it burned constantly, a fire that no amount of revenge could extinguish. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Still thinking about this afternoon. You're special, Lily. See you in class tomorrow. M. Lily deleted it without responding. Let him wonder. Let him think about her. Let him anticipate their next encounter. He had no idea he'd already had his last healthy day. The countdown had started. In his brownstone, Marcus climbed into bed beside Sarah, who was already asleep with a book on her chest. He carefully removed it, feeling a flash of the affection he'd felt 20 years ago when they'd met in grad school. She'd been brilliant then, sharp and challenging and alive. But people changed. Sarah had chosen motherhood and domesticity over her career. She'd become comfortable, predictable, boring. Could he really be blamed for seeking excitement elsewhere? For wanting to feel young and desired and powerful? He thought about Lily, her innocence, her vulnerability, her gratitude. Already planning their next encounter, Marcus fell asleep with a smile, completely unaware that the axis of his entire life had just shifted. The disease Lily carried was already multiplying in his system, beginning its destructive work. The clock was ticking, and Marcus Wellington's reckoning was coming. In her own bed, Lily stared at the ceiling, counting down. 21 days, give or take. Then Professor Wellington would discover that some prey bites back. 3 weeks later, Marcus Wellington noticed the first symptom, a burning sensation that he initially dismissed as a urinary tract infection. He'd had them before, occupational hazard of the active sex life he maintained. He took over-the-counter medication and expected it to clear up. It didn't. By day 5, the burning had intensified to a constant, gnawing pain. Marcus found himself shifting uncomfortably during lectures, struggling to focus. Students noticed. Professor Wellington, usually so commanding and confident, kept cutting classes short and seemed distracted. Are you all right, Professor? Madison Chen asked after class, genuine concern in her eyes. She'd been his regular companion for the past month, meeting him twice a week at the Midtown apartment. Last week, she'd mentioned some discomfort, but Marcus had dismissed it as nothing serious. Fine. Just a minor health issue. Marcus gathered his papers quickly, eager to escape. I'll see you next week. But he wouldn't. By next week, everything would be different. That evening, Marcus finally admitted he needed to see a doctor. He chose a clinic in New Jersey, far from Columbia, far from anyone who might know him. The doctor, a tired-looking man in his 50s, examined him with professional detachment. "How long have you had these symptoms?" "About a week." Marcus tried to sound casual, like this was routine. "Any discharge?" Marcus hesitated. There had been something that morning, a small amount of fluid, cloudy and foul-smelling. He'd been terrified to acknowledge it. Yesterday." The doctor's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw something flicker in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or disgust. "I'm going to run some tests. The lab will call you in a few days with results. In the meantime, abstain from all sexual activity." The doctor scribbled something on a prescription pad. "These antibiotics should help with the symptoms, but we need to identify exactly what we're dealing with." "What do you think it might be?" Marcus's voice came out smaller than he intended. "Let's wait for the test results before speculating." The doctor handed him the prescription. "But Mr. Wellington, I need to ask, have you had multiple sexual partners recently?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus wanted to lie, to protect his reputation even here, in this anonymous clinic where no one knew him. "Yes," he admitted finally. "They'll all need to be notified and tested. This could be serious." Marcus left the clinic with trembling hands. Multiple partners. Notified. Serious. The words echoed in his head. He thought about Madison, about the sophomore he'd slept with 2 weeks ago, about Lily, sweet, innocent Lily whom he'd been carefully cultivating for another encounter. The antibiotics didn't help. By day 10 after symptoms began, the burning had become agony. Marcus found himself making excuses to cancel classes, avoiding physical activity, spending hours in the bathroom. The discharge had increased, thick and putrid, with a smell he couldn't mask no matter how thoroughly he washed. The test results came back on a Friday. Marcus took the call in his office, door locked, hands shaking as he held the phone. "Mr. Wellington, this is Dr. Morris from Garden State Medical. I'm calling about your test results." Marcus's heart hammered. "Yes?" "I'm afraid the news isn't good. You've tested positive for a rare bacterial infection. The medical name is complex, but essentially, it's a sexually transmitted disease that's highly aggressive and, I'm sorry to say, currently without a complete cure." The world tilted. "What do you mean, without a cure?" "We can treat the symptoms and slow the progression with aggressive antibiotic therapy, but the infection itself is extremely resistant to current treatments. It causes progressive damage to the urogenital tract. In advanced cases." The doctor's voice was clinically sympathetic. "Mr. Wellington, you need to come in immediately to discuss treatment options. And you absolutely must notify all recent sexual partners. This is highly contagious, and the window for effective early intervention is closing for anyone you may have exposed." Marcus ended the call and sat in stunned silence. No cure. Progressive damage. Notify partners. His mind raced through implications like falling dominoes. He thought about Sarah first. They'd had sex once in the past month, perfunctory marital maintenance. Had he given it to her? The wife he betrayed for 7 years, potentially infected because of his carelessness? Then Madison, the sophomore. 3 other students he'd been with in recent months. And Lily, he'd only been with her once, but the timing. His office suddenly felt suffocating. Marcus stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, the stress and fear overwhelming his system. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. His face was pale, drawn. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd lost weight from the constant pain and inability to eat. How had this happened? He'd always been careful, not careful enough to use protection consistently, but careful about selecting partners who seemed clean. Young, attractive, well-groomed students from good families. It had never occurred to him that any of them might be carrying something serious. Over the next week, Marcus's condition deteriorated rapidly. The smell became unavoidable, a sickly sweet rot that followed him everywhere. He started wearing cologne to mask it, but students still wrinkled their noses when he passed. Whispers followed him through hallways. In his lectures, students sat in the back rows, leaving a conspicuous empty zone around the front. Professor Wellington, Dean Richardson, called him into his office 2 weeks after the diagnosis. "We've received several complaints. Students reporting a smell. And your recent absences haven't gone unnoticed. Is everything all right?" Marcus wanted to lie, to protect what remained of his dignity. But the dean was staring at him with barely concealed concern, and Marcus realized he probably looked as bad as he felt, gaunt, sweaty, moving with careful discomfort. "I'm dealing with a medical issue," Marcus said carefully. "I'm seeing doctors. It should be resolved soon." It was a lie. The doctors had been clear, this wasn't going away. The best they could hope for was management, and even that was uncertain given the infection's resistance to treatment. Dean Richardson nodded slowly. "Marcus, I'm going to suggest a medical leave of absence. Take the rest of the semester off. Focus on your health. We'll manage your classes." It wasn't really a suggestion. Marcus heard the implicit command, "Leave before we have to force you out." "I understand," Marcus said quietly. That evening, he finally told Sarah. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he came home early, his face ashen, his carefully constructed lies finally crumbling under the weight of reality. "Sarah, we need to talk." She set down her knife, seeing something in his face that made her own expression close off protectively. "What is it?" "I need you to sit down." "I'll stand, thank you." Her voice was cool now, guarded. "Whatever you have to say, just say it." "I'm sick. I've contracted, there's an infection. A serious one." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "It's sexually transmitted." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face cycled through emotions, confusion, comprehension, disbelief, horror, and finally, cold fury. "You gave me an STI?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "After 21 years of marriage, you've been sleeping around and gave me a disease? I don't know if you're infected. We need to get you tested." "We need to get me tested?" Sarah's control shattered. "How many, Marcus? How many students have you fucked while I sat here playing the dutiful wife?" Sarah. How many? Marcus flinched from her rage. I don't know. I didn't keep count. Several. Over the years. Years. Sarah laughed bitterly. Not a one-time mistake. Not a brief affair. Years of betrayal. Of exposing me to God knows what. Of coming home and lying to my face. I'm sorry. Sorry? Sarah grabbed the knife she'd been using, and for a terrifying moment Marcus thought she might use it on him. Instead, she stabbed it into the cutting board with vicious force. You're sorry. Well, that makes it all better, doesn't it? Tell me about the infection, Marcus. What exactly have you brought into our home? Marcus explained haltingly, the symptoms, the diagnosis, the lack of cure. With each word, he watched Sarah's face close further, any remaining affection dissolving into contempt. The doctors said you should get tested immediately. There are treatments that can help if we catch it early. If we catch it? Sarah's voice was ice. There is no we anymore, Marcus. Get out. This is my home. It's my home. My parents' home. My inheritance. You've been living here on my generosity, and that generosity has just expired. Sarah pulled her phone from her pocket. I'm calling my lawyer. You have until tomorrow morning to pack what you need and leave. Everything else can be sorted through legal channels. Sarah, please. I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting anniversaries or leaving socks on the floor. What you did is betrayal. Calculated, repeated, years-long betrayal. And now you've potentially destroyed my health too. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. I will never forgive you for this. Never. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, to explain, to somehow make her understand. But what was there to understand? He'd spent 7 years treating students like disposable entertainment, treating his marriage like a formality, treating everyone around him with callous disregard. And now the bill had come due. He packed a bag that night and moved to a hotel. Lying alone in the generic room, Marcus felt the full weight of his choices crushing down on him. His marriage was over. His career was effectively finished. Medical leave was just a polite way of pushing him out. His health was permanently compromised. And somewhere out there, an unknown number of young women he'd infected were discovering their own damage. The guilt was overwhelming. Madison Chen, the scholarship student with dreams of graduate school. The sophomore whose name he couldn't even remember. Lily Patterson, with her innocent eyes and vulnerable demeanor. Lily. Something about her nagged at him. The timing was too perfect. He'd been with her right before symptoms started. But no, that was paranoid thinking. Sweet, sheltered Lily couldn't possibly be connected to this nightmare. Could she? Marcus tried calling her, but the number he had went to voicemail. He sent an email to her student account. We need to talk. Urgent. Please call me. No response. Over the next week, as his symptoms worsened despite aggressive treatment, Marcus became obsessed with finding Lily. He went to the registrar's office, using his faculty access to pull up her file. What he found made his blood run cold. Lily Patterson's transfer records showed she'd come from a small upstate college. But when he called that college to verify, they had no record of any student by that name. Her references, fabricated. Her transcripts, forged. Even her social security number belonged to a different person entirely. Lily Patterson didn't exist. Marcus sat in his hotel room, the pieces slowly coming together. A transfer student with false credentials. Showing up just weeks before his infection. Targeting him specifically. The innocent act that had seemed so genuine. She'd known. Lily had deliberately infected him. This wasn't an accident or bad luck. This was premeditated biological warfare. But why? What had he done to deserve this? The answer came 2 days later when campus security found Madison Chin collapsed outside the student health center. She'd been suffering in silence for weeks, too ashamed to seek help, until the pain became unbearable. At the hospital, her diagnosis was the same as Marcus's. When questioned about possible exposure, she'd broken down crying and told the whole story. Professor Wellington, the hotel room, the months of meetings, the promises of recommendations. Madison's parents arrived the next day, furious and ready to sue. Behind them came Ashley Rodriguez's parents. Then Jennifer Walsh's. One by one, Marcus's victims came forward, connected by their shared infection and their shared trauma. The university launched an investigation. Detective Sarah Chen from the NYPD Special Victims Unit was assigned to the case, interviewing students, pulling records, building a timeline. What emerged was 7 years of predatory behavior, dozens of students, and a pattern of grooming and exploitation that made even seasoned investigators sick. But the investigation kept circling back to Lily Patterson, the ghost student who disappeared without a trace the day before Thanksgiving break. Her apartment had been cleared out, her belongings gone, rent paid through the end of the month in cash. Security footage showed her leaving campus with a single suitcase, getting into a cab, and vanishing. She was patient zero, Detective Chen told Marcus during their third interview. Every infected student traces back to you, Professor Wellington. But you trace back to her. Whoever Lily Patterson really was, she came to Columbia for one reason, to destroy you. But why? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from pain and despair. I'd never met her before. Never even heard her name. That's what we're trying to figure out. The answer came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, one of Marcus's earliest victims, mentioned in her interview that she'd dated a Columbia senior named Derek Matthews 2 years ago. Derek had given her chlamydia, easily treated, nothing like the nightmare infection they were all dealing with now. But the investigators' ears perked up at the name. Derek Matthews had graduated Columbia 18 months ago and was now working in finance in Boston. When Detective Chen contacted him, Derek initially denied everything. But when presented with medical records showing he carried the same rare infection currently devastating Columbia's campus, he broke. There was this girl, Derek admitted over the phone. About 6 months before graduation. Met her at a party off campus. We hooked up a few times. She seemed really into me, then she just ghosted. A few weeks later, I started having symptoms. Do you remember her name? Lily something, I think. She said she was visiting from another school, thinking about transferring. Pretty girl, kind of quiet. I didn't think much of it when she disappeared. Girls ghost all the time. Did you know you were infected when you were sleeping with her? Derek's silence was answer enough. Mr. Matthews, I need you to answer the question. Yeah. I'd been with someone else a few weeks before who told me afterwards she had something. But I didn't think it was serious. And Lily was just, a hookup. I didn't think I needed to tell her. Detective Chen felt disgust rise in her throat. You knowingly infected someone and didn't care enough to warn her or even use protection? Look, I know how it sounds now, but it's not like. It's exactly like it sounds, Mr. Matthews. You're a carrier of a serious, incurable infection that you've been spreading for over a year. You'll be receiving a subpoena shortly. And Mr. Matthews? You might want to get a lawyer. After the call, Detective Chen sat back in her chair, the picture becoming clearer. Lily Patterson, whoever she really was, had been infected by Derek Matthews. Derek, who'd knowingly spread the disease without remorse. Derek, who'd treated her like a disposable hookup. Lily had contracted something that would affect her for the rest of her life from a careless, selfish man who couldn't be bothered to care about the damage he caused. So she decided to return the favor. Not just to Derek, but to men like him. Men who used women without consequence. Men who saw female bodies as territory to conquer rather than people to respect. Professor Marcus Wellington, with his 7-year history of exploiting students, must have seemed like the perfect target. She's a vigilante, Detective Chen said to her partner. She's hunting predators. That doesn't make her any less dangerous, her partner replied. She's infected dozens of people, many of whom did nothing wrong except sleep with the wrong person. This isn't justice, it's bioterrorism. Detective Chen couldn't argue with that. But part of her understood the rage that must have driven Lily to such extremes. In her 15 years working sex crimes, she'd seen countless cases like Marcus Wellington, powerful men exploiting vulnerable women, protected by institutions that valued reputation over justice. How many times had she watched predators walk free because the system failed their victims? Still, there were rules. Laws. And Lily Patterson had broken them in the most devastating way possible. The manhunt began. The FBI joined the investigation, classifying Lily as a domestic bioterrorist. Her real identity remained elusive, the name was an alias, the documents forgeries. Facial recognition came up empty. It was as if she'd been a ghost all along. Meanwhile, Marcus's life continued its freefall. The university officially terminated his employment, tenure be damned. The scandal made national news. Columbia professor infected dozens of students in 7-year predatory scheme. That the headline made him sound like the sole perpetrator of the disease rather than a victim himself was ironic, but Marcus was beyond caring about such distinctions. Sarah filed for divorce with prejudice. She'd tested negative, lucky, the doctors said, given the exposure. She wanted nothing from Marcus except his absence. Emma, their daughter, refused to speak to him. At 15, she was old enough to understand what her father had done, and old enough to be disgusted by it. My friends know, Emma had screamed at him during their last phone call. Everyone at school knows my father is a predator who got what he deserved. I can't show my face anywhere. I hate you. The words cut deeper than any physical pain. Marcus's symptoms continued to worsen despite aggressive medical intervention. The infection was doing exactly what the doctors had warned: progressive, irreversible damage. His manhood had begun to atrophy and shrink, a humiliating physical manifestation of his downfall. The smell was constant now, impossible to mask. He couldn't go out in public without people noticing, couldn't sit in waiting rooms without other patients moving away. He'd become untouchable in the most literal sense. The other victims were dealing with their own nightmares. Madison Chen had dropped out of Columbia, her dreams of graduate school shattered along with her health and reputation. Her family was suing the university for millions, claiming they'd failed to protect students from a known predator. Other families were joining the lawsuit. Columbia's lawyers were already working on settlement offers, trying to contain the damage to the institution's reputation. Ashley Rodriguez was in therapy, struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. The infection had made her infertile, a fact the doctors delivered with clinical detachment but which devastated the 20-year-old who'd always dreamed of having children. Jennifer Walsh had become an advocate, speaking publicly about her experience, trying to warn other students about the dangers of relationships with professors. "The power dynamic makes real consent impossible," she told a reporter. "I thought I was making choices, but I was being manipulated by someone who held my future in his hands." They were all victims, Marcus's victims. But also Lily's. The disease didn't discriminate between the guilty and the relatively innocent. It spread with biological efficiency, destroying everyone in its path. 3 months after the infection began, Marcus received a single email from an untraceable account. "Dear Professor Wellington, by now you understand what you've lost. Your career, your marriage, your health, your dignity. Everything you built through decades of hard work, gone because you couldn't keep your dick in your pants. I know you've been looking for me. You won't find me. I don't exist in any system you can access. But I exist in your body, in every moment of pain and humiliation you experience. I am your reckoning. You're probably wondering what you did to deserve this. The truth is, you deserved it simply by being who you are, a predator who spent 7 years exploiting young women, using your position and power to manipulate students into situations where saying no was nearly impossible. You destroyed futures, damaged psyches, and never once felt genuine remorse. Until now. Derek Matthews infected me deliberately. He knew he was sick and didn't care enough about me to even mention it. When I confronted him, he laughed and told me to get over it. So I made sure he'd have to live with the consequences of his actions, just like I have to live with mine. Then I came for you. You were easy to research. The whisper network among female students is extensive. They all knew about you. They warned each other. But warnings aren't enough when the predator has tenure and the institution protects its reputation over its students. I've given you something you can never get rid of, Professor Wellington. Every day for the rest of your life, you'll wake up and remember what you've lost. You'll smell it, feel it, live it. And you'll know it was your own actions that brought you here. The other women I infected through you? That blood is on your hands, not mine. Every student you exploited, every life you damaged, they were already your victims. I just made sure there were finally consequences. I won't tell you I'm sorry, because I'm not. You're finally experiencing a fraction of what you put others through. The fear, the shame, the permanent damage. The difference is, you actually deserved it. Rot from the inside out, Professor. You've earned it. Ghost. Marcus read the email 3 times, his hands shaking. Ghost. That's what she called herself. A fitting name for someone who'd materialized just long enough to destroy him, then vanished without a trace. He wanted to be angry, to rage against the injustice of it. But deep down, in a place he'd been avoiding since this nightmare began, Marcus knew she was right. Not about her methods. Biological warfare was indefensible, and the innocent people she'd hurt through him bore witness to that. But about his guilt? About the 7 years of exploitation and manipulation? About the damage he'd inflicted without thought or care? She was right about all of it. That night, Marcus stood in his hotel bathroom, staring at his reflection. The distinguished professor was gone. In his place was a gaunt, hollow-eyed man who smelled of rot and looked like death. His career was finished. His marriage was over. His daughter had disowned him. His body was failing in the most humiliating way possible. And he couldn't even claim to be a victim, because everything that had happened to him was simply the logical conclusion of his own choices. Marcus opened the bottle of sleeping pills his doctor had prescribed for the insomnia that plagued him. He poured them into his palm, 30 small white tablets. Enough, probably. Enough to end the pain and the shame and the constant reminder of his fall. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd built and the way he'd destroyed it. He thought about Emma, about the father he'd failed to be. He thought about Madison and Ashley and Jennifer and all the others whose names he couldn't even remember. Young women who'd trusted him, who'd believed his lies, who'd thought he actually cared about their futures when all he'd cared about was getting them into bed. He thought about Lily, Ghost, whoever she really was. A victim who'd become a perpetrator. Hurt people hurting people in an endless cycle of damage. Marcus raised the handful of pills to his mouth. The hotel room door burst open.